Why are we so high on Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, Puka Nacua again this week? It's time to break down our wide receiver and tight end rankings for week 3, only on Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Today, we'll look at our wide receiver and tight end rankings. We're Locked On Fantasy Football, your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in your league. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your fantasy football team every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie Iyer, and when I'm not doing this, I'm running for sportingnews.com, covering NFL, fantasy, and betting.
Hey, Michelle Magdziuk. I'm a researcher for NFL Network and fantasy analyst at NFL.com.
All right, Michelle, we are going to look at our wide receiver and tight end rankings. If you mix our look at the running backs and quarterbacks, we did that yesterday for you on the show. So we do that every Wednesday. We look at the wide receivers and tight ends here on Thursday. We'll get into those in a moment. I do have to tell you, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's a crossover Thursday on PrizePicks. The easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Goes to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, for first deposit match up to $100. All right, Michelle, we are feeling some guys that have been hot so far this season. Really have had two big games in a row. Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, Puka Nacua. Like, we think they're going to go off again this week, and these guys have maybe been some of the biggest stories so far at wide receiver in fantasy.
Yeah, it's pretty wild with Puka, right? I say finally, it's only week 3, but I have him in my top 10. I will say you still have him down at wide receiver 15, but you're playing him, right? Like, you can't ignore that he's gotten 15 targets in his first ever game and then 20 targets in week 2. Like, just with that kind of production, and his ceiling is clearly even higher than that because he hasn't even scored a touchdown yet. So what he's doing for fantasy is absurd. He's a must play, obviously, until things change. Like, maybe when Cooper Kupp gets back, we'll see if his target share goes down. But for now, you keep playing him. I'll say I have CeeDee Lamb as my wide receiver 3 this week. You have him down at wide receiver 10. I mean, if you have a guy in your top 10, you're saying he's still going to have a pretty good week. But is there any particular reason why you don't have him higher this week? Are you worried about, them going up against the Cardinals and thus not needing to pass as much?
Yeah, that's basically it here. And I was just looking at the upside of some of these other guys. I really like Stephon Diggs this week. I think it's going to be a Diggs week there against the Commanders. A.J. Brown, I think he finally gets going after he carped a lot on Jalen Hurts on the sidelines. And I don't have scrubs ahead of him. I have some guys that we've looked at that are established here. I think maybe one surprise, Davante Adams. But I have Mike Evans at 6. You have him still solidly there at 12, so we're looking at him as a wide receiver 1 to keep it going against that Eagles secondary. And Keenan Allen, he's been fantastic so far. I have him at 8. You have him at 6. So, yeah, these are some guys that we didn't expect to have ahead of CeeDee Lamb, but that's where they are now. Maybe Davante Adams being a surprise there. I just look at this matchup against the Steelers. I think it's a good matchup here overall for Adams and getting going here, especially if Jacoby Myers has to miss another week. They're going to have to throw them off. And we know the Steelers secondary can have its issues. They struggled with Amari Cooper, a number 1 receiver last week. Brandon Aiyuk torched them in week 1. So I think you'll get a Davante Adams type game and potential high volume. I think that's going to be maybe a sneakier, high scoring game than we think. So CeeDee Lamb, I'm just not feeling Dak Prescott and the Cowboys too much this week, just putting up big passing numbers, only because they're going to be up big. Dak's going to probably look at tight ends, and CeeDee Lamb is going to be a little bit bottled up. And I was a bit surprised maybe the Cardinals' defense has overachieved here in the first 2 weeks as well.
I will say it could be like a week 1 Giants game where
Yeah.
the Cowboys defense just absolutely destroys the Cardinals defense. Maybe they score a defensive touchdown or 2, and that takes away points from Dak Prescott and from CeeDee Lamb. But CeeDee Lamb should still have a great week. He put up 143 yards last week. He's still just doing what he did last year. So we love to see that. One guy who's not doing at all what we're used to him doing in fantasy is Jamar Chase. And I still have him ranked as my wide receiver 10. You have him at wide receiver 14. Are we just seeing the name and ranking him high? Should he be lower? I mean, through 2 weeks now, it's 5 receptions, 39 yards, 5 receptions, 31 yards. Joe Burrow's, we were uncertain how he's going to look, if he's even going to play. Do we have him too high?
Yeah, I just think the talent, I just can't drop him too much lower than that.
Yeah.
I just can't. I mean, but still, I would say versus what we've seen elsewhere, I mean, having him at 10, having him at 14 is low for Jamar Chase. He's a guy that
True.
you drafted there early, right? I mean, you drafted him right up there with Justin Jefferson to be a dominant wide receiver. He's not close to Jefferson's numbers right now. Jamar Chase, he actually might be helped in a weird way if Jake Browning starts, because Jake Browning is probably going to throw a lot to the number one receiver. T. Higgins is not going to be involved as much. And the secondary is not bad for the Rams. They've actually surprised. They've only allowed 1 touchdown pass in 2 games here.
Yeah.
So that's a little concerning that they're playing pretty well without Jalen Ramsey. But, Jamar Chase is going to remember the Super Bowl. He had a nice Super Bowl against this team. So, and I think he was the first guy to say, I need to have maybe Joe Burrow sit a little bit, get healthy. So I think Jamar Chase is likely to step up a little bit. I can't put him any higher than that, however, because I'm not sure what you're going to get from Browning. And the Rams' pass defense, again, as I said, is overachieved.
Yeah, the Rams just entire defense has really overachieved. We thought they were going to be terrible. I mean, on paper, they should be terrible. They have like no experience, but these youngins are playing tough. So you like to see that. And yeah, you just have to keep plugging in Jamar Chase. And he can break any time a ball is in his hands, he can break it off for a long touchdown. So hopefully they just pepper him with targets and let him do the work after the catch. You have Calvin Ridley at wide receiver 11. I have him down at wide receiver 20. I'm kind of like you, where I just don't like you with CeeDee Lamb, where you don't think the Cowboys are going to need to throw much against the Jaguars, against the Texans. I just think they're going to run all over them.
Yeah, that's something they'll look at for sure. And Trevor Lawrence, the history against the Texans is not very good, but keep in mind that's a different style of defense and different style of team that he's faced in the past. So I think Calvin Ridley, the Texans are probably going to play a lot of zone here as well. And it was a bad week last week, so I think they'll try to get Calvin Ridley involved. I also consider that Zay Jones is hurt, so that might help a little bit, funneling targets there to Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk back and forth here in this game. So look, the Texans secondary is better and their pass defense is pretty good because, again, teams run on them. So the numbers are going to favor their pass defense because teams are just not attempting balls here. But I think the Jaguars also need to get well game. Their passing game has been a little bit out of sync. It was not very good last week against the Chiefs. So they'll get Ridley involved here. So again, he's a guy that is in that range all the time. And we look at 11 through 20, he's always somewhere there, borderline wide receiver 1 into solid wide receiver 2.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about his upside in this game. Like, teams just don't have to pass on the Texans. And I don't know. I don't think it's that the Texans have a good pass defense, but they really just don't allow very many points to wide receivers whatsoever. Over the last 10 games, only 3 wide receivers have even put up 15 PPR points against them in a game. So I think it's going to be a lower ceiling game for him, but still a good wide receiver to play this week. Another guy I really like as a wide receiver to play is Amari Cooper against the Titans. And you're kind of with me there, a little bit lower, but we're close. Wide receiver 14 for me, wide receiver 19 for you. I just think against the Titans, they're not going to be able to run the ball very well. And without Nick Chubb, I don't know how well Jerome Ford is going to do against this Titans defense. He's been getting the targets, right? 10 targets last week against Steelers, put up 90 yards. Deshaun Watson doesn't look fantastic, but he's getting the ball to Amari Cooper. So I still think he's a good play.
Yeah, what we're seeing with Deshaun Watson to me is a lot of very young Deshaun Watson. Everyone says he's not vintage Deshaun Watson, but I think he's a young Deshaun Watson where what was he doing? He was feeding DeAndre Hopkins a lot. And he wasn't finding other guys all that much. Elijah Moore has not been involved. David Njoku's not been involved. Where's Donovan Peoples-Jones? He's basically disappeared from this offense. So he has eyes for Amari Cooper, and I think if people are annoyed with Amari Cooper from last week because there are all these reports that he wasn't going to play on Monday night. He disputed them, and he's out there, and he goes out there and has a big game. So you're annoyed with Amari Cooper, but don't sit him, play him this week, get those points. It's a very good matchup against this Titans secondary. I think that's the only guy I really can trust totally this week in that matchup. I don't love Deshaun Watson because, again, he could be very sloppy. This Titans team looks for turnovers and tries to get after the quarterback a little bit. So, look, on the back end, I think it'll be fine with Cooper, but I'm not sure if I'm trusting much else in the Browns passing game the way it is right now with Watson.
Yeah, if there is a matchup where Elijah Moore maybe could do it, it would be this one. In both the first 2 weeks, the Titans allowed Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed to put up 80 yards in week 1. And then last week, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams both had nice games over 80 yards in week 2. So maybe it happens. Maybe you throw him in at DFS, but I can't keep trusting him in my lineups. We have a lot of great other wide receiver discussions to hit on in our next segment. We'll be talking about the 49ers wide receivers. Do we trust Brandon Aiyuk, or are we moving over to Deebo Samuel on Thursday Night Football? But first, we need to talk about 2 of our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they go more or less than PrizePicks projections, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. At PrizePicks, you aren't competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks. PrizePicks adds a ton of excitement to the sporting viewing experience. Players can choose from a vast selection of sports and stat types not offered anywhere else. And you can even pick in-game projections after a game has started, which includes halves, quarters, periods, and more. Vinnie and I will be giving you our favorite picks of the week on tomorrow's show, so make sure you don't miss out on that. To sign up for PrizePicks, you just go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl and use code LOCKEDONNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Another one of our sponsors is Jase Medical. They're an awesome company. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so they're not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery, and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com and promo code LOCKEDON. All right, so we have a big decision to make here, Vinny, for Thursday Night Football. We have the 49ers versus the Giants. You expect the 49ers always put up points. It doesn't matter who they play, but against the Giants defense, they definitely should. Brandon Aiyuk is dealing with a bit of a shoulder injury that he aggravated like twice during the game last week. We don't know if he's going to play yet, but if he does play, are you trusting him, or are we just moving on? Like, do you prefer Deebo Samuel in this matchup?
I think if he's playing, I think there's going to be a kind of intention to get him the ball a few times. He may have less snaps, but he's been wide open and making some big plays for Brock Purdy. And I think he settles Brock Purdy, at least as a downfield thrower. Now, it was very frustrating last week. Brock Purdy, first game of his regular season career without a touchdown pass. He did have a touchdown run, but missed Deebo Samuel, missed Brandon Aiyuk. So it was not the greatest game for Brock Purdy. I think the 49ers really could have poured it on the Rams. So that's something we don't see sometimes, that the Rams probably should have given up 2 receiving touchdowns last week. But when you look at it at this stage, Brandon Ayuk, I think, is in pain. I think that it coming down to a game time decision, that I really think there's a good chance he misses the game. If he's out there, the 49ers wouldn't just risk him. It's a team that they should beat, right, pretty easily. So if he's out there, I would say he's going to be close to 100%, and you'll get enough targets from Purdy to make it worth it. So I have a hard time sitting him unless you have some really good options. Maybe you have a Puka Nacua or somewhere like that that you could think about as an alternative. But yeah, I think it's hard to sit him. I think Deebo Samuel, however, bumps up. It's been pretty modest of a start for Deebo. It hasn't been actually that great. I mean, if you took him as a wide receiver too, so far you've had 11 receptions, 18 targets, 118 yards in 2 games. That's usually a Deebo one game from a couple of years ago. So we need Deebo to get going. I think if Ayuk doesn't sit, bump up George Kittle, bump up Deebo, maybe a little bit of extra work for Christian McCaffrey, the passing game, where he's not been involved all that much. So, look, if he's out there, play him, but I think maybe downgrade him to wide receiver 3 if you're looking to make a decision there. And if he's not, then you bump up maybe Deebo finally to wide receiver 1 this week.
Yeah, I do think it's okay to sit Brandon Ayuk. He does look good, but with this shoulder injury, and like you said, there's no reason for them to push him too hard against the Giants. Like, they have plenty of other weapons, and maybe this does give you some hope that George Kittle might finally get some targets.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a George Kittle game with Ayuk out. That's when Kittle normally does pretty well, is when one of these guys are out, Deebo or Ayuk, and there's always an injury in this team with the 49ers. So that will happen. So I like Deebo this week. I also would feel a little bit more confident in George Kittle. You're playing Kittle anyways if you drafted him, but at least now you can feel a little bit better that maybe he'll get some targets. A guy I really like, and I would play him over Brandon Ayuk, it's Jordan Addison for the Vikings. I have him at wide receiver 21 this week. I even think like that's a little low. I think his ceiling is very high this week. You have him at wide receiver 28. He hasn't played all that many snaps. So they're definitely limiting his snaps, and hopefully those increase, right? I don't understand why they wouldn't. 35 snaps in week 1, 37 in week 2. Hopefully we see those keep increasing. But in both weeks, he had over 60 receiving yards, and he scored a touchdown in both those games. He gets an awesome matchup against the Chargers this week. We expect it to be a super high scoring game. We expect Kirk Cousins to have a great week. So I think this is another week for Jordan Addison where he at least has 60 yards and probably a touchdown again. But I think his ceiling is where he, has his first 100 receiving yard game this week.
Yeah, he's been a hard guy to rank because he gets limited snaps. His production in the 2 games has been based on one massive play that has gone for a touchdown. Now, that's a design of the offense that he's getting open, and they're looking for him as a deep threat. And we know what the Chargers have done. They've not looked very good when they've had receivers with speed. Tyreek Hill torched them absolutely in week 1. J.C. Jackson and the secondaries looked awful. So, look, Jordan Addison has a good chance to score. I like him. I think he's more of a boomer bust play. I actually do like him a lot in DFS and a stack with Kirk Cousins this week. I mean, this game's going to be high scoring, and I would like to get a piece of that. And he's a little bit cheaper, of course, than Justin Jefferson. So, yeah, I do like it. I just have him a little bit conservatively ranked because he's a little bit big play dependent, right? He needs to get those big plays to make it happen here. But, yeah, I mean, 21, 28, we're not too far off on him. I think he's a very solid borderline wide receiver 2 most weeks because he has that potential for big plays. Some days he's going to let down, but I think this is a good opportunity there against the Chargers secondary. One guy also in the rookie realm, first-round pick that I really like that's being moved around, Zay Flowers. And you look at this matchup, it's very good against the Colts at home, and the Colts secondary is pretty bad. So we know that there's some opportunities. We saw what the Jaguars did against them in week 1. So I think there's an opportunity for Flowers to get going. We're still pretty involved here, and now you don't have Odell Beckham Jr. probably. So Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, that's where this offense is going to flow through a lot here. So I do like him quite a bit. Again, another guy that has a nice floor developing ceiling. I have him right there at wide receiver 23. So it doesn't matter if you have Addison or Flowers. These guys look like very nice picks here for you as rookies.
Yeah, the matchup for Zay Flowers is great. The Colts have allowed already 4 touchdowns to wide receivers this season. You've been calling it all year. You've been saying like, yeah, the Colts secondary is garbage. Like you're going to want to play the guys against them. And I think so far that's looking amazing. You just keep starting the guys going up against the Colts. So I do like Zay Flowers this week. One guy I'm loving and you are very down on is I think Jerry Jeudy is a good play this week. Last week, he didn't get to play very many snaps, but I think we see those increase greatly. Another week removed from the hamstring injury. I have him at wide receiver 23. You have him all the way down at wide receiver 41. So you are nervous about him. But like I said, he had 5 targets last week, playing 35% of the snaps, right? So no, it wasn't a good fantasy day, but it's still nice to see he got targets when he was actually on the field. And he was Russell Wilson's favorite target at the end of last season. He averaged over 90 receiving yards per game from weeks 14 through 18. He was a wide receiver 3 in fantasy during that span. And I expect the Broncos to have to pass quite a bit against the Dolphins to keep up with them in this matchup. There could be a lot of garbage time. I really think Jerry Jeudy has a nice fantasy day in week 3.
Yeah, full disclosure, I'm not a Jerry Jeudy fan. Like he just hasn't
I'm
lived
not really
up to
either.
us.
He
Yeah,
like he
yeah.
never
So
does
that's probably
anything.
why it's hard for me when I see his name and I'm trying to rank him. I said, I don't want to play this guy. I don't want anyone else to play this guy unless you have to. But that's what the trouble is, Michelle. Like the atmosphere is great for him to produce. And they're probably going to look at Marvin Mims a little bit more. I know they didn't give him a lot of snaps or Brandon Johnson last week, but I'm looking at the Broncos. They're 0-2. They need to start looking at some youngsters. Jerry Jeudy's a hard guy to commit to long term. They already paid Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick, who's hurt twice in a row now. So I don't think they love Jerry Jeudy, this new coaching staff. And I think they got annoyed by this injury. So I don't know. I don't know if he's going to be like straight up being dropped a little bit. I just don't know what to get. I don't know that I want to play a player that could be totally not involved. If they get way behind and they're going to throw deep like they did last week and try to rally with Mims and Johnson and Cortland Sutton. So we'll see how this plays out. In theory, I'm there with you. I like him. I just don't trust him. So again, I'm going to take him right out of my wide receiver 3s this week. Again, I think he's viable based on the matchup. If you look at it and say, okay, Xavier Howard's on the other side, he might go there with Cortland Sutton. So all those things are nice. I just need to see to believe here with Jerry Jeudy.
That makes sense. I'm believing. I'm believing this week. I'm
Okay.
going to trust him and plug him in. Garrett Wilson is a guy we both have low for where he should be, right? Wide receiver 26 and wide receiver 28. He ended up coming through last week. He only had 2 receptions. It was going to be a disgusting day, but he broke off that long, catch and run for a touchdown. Love to see it. Now he has to go up against the Patriots. So second hard matchup. The Patriots did just hold Tyreek Hill to 5 receptions, 40 yards on 9 targets last week. He did get a touchdown though, right? So I feel like that's what it's going to come down to for Garrett Wilson this week. Does he get the touchdown or not? Because I don't think he's going to put up a bunch of receptions and receiving yards.
Yeah, he is going to be touchdown dependent. I don't even like saying it, but last week at least he got a big play with a touchdown. But I think it's going to be, what do the Patriots do here, right? Do they try to slow down Breece Hall? I said maybe they'll slow down Garrett Wilson instead and take their chances with the Jets running game, knowing that they're not going to get a lot of big plays there if they do that, and see if they can contain Hall from breaking free. So, but what I like in this game, it's going to be an epic matchup, I think. You look at Christian Gonzalez, he could be this year's Sauce Gardner. I think that's how good he's played, and looking at his just efforts. I mean, his speed is there. Like he can keep up with Garrett Wilson, just a tremendous athlete out of Oregon. So this is going to be a fun matchup. Maybe they double team and just take him out of the game. We know what the Patriots do. They're going to take one of these guys out, Garrett Wilson or Breece Hall. I'm leaning towards Wilson being that guy just because he can change the game so quickly if you leave him open. So yeah. So I wish I could be higher on him. This is a player I love, but I can't rank higher if I wanted to.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's unfortunate.
You plug him in, you draft him high, you keep plugging him in, you just hope for those big plays, right? He has high ceiling, low floor in any given week. Another guy that has a high ceiling, low floor in any given week is Gabe Davis. But this was a player that I was really high on, not really high on, but I like taking him later in drafts this year. I believe that he was injured last year. Josh Allen was injured. I thought he was going to have a better, more consistent season. Week 1, we all knew, like, against the Jets, that's not his matchup. But week 2, great matchup. He did good. I think this week against Washington, they just got beat 3 times deep last week, right? Marvin Mims had the 2 big plays and the Hail Mary catch. I think if he gets to go up against rookie Emmanuel Forbes, it's going to be a nice game for him again. So I like plugging in Gabe Davis. I'm going to keep trusting him. Again, of course, he has a low floor, but always a high ceiling to help you win your matchup. And 2 guys we're both seem to be completely off this week is Marquise Brown and DeAndre Hopkins. Both pretty bad matchups. I have a hard time. Would you even consider playing Marquise Brown whatsoever against
He surprised
the
me
Cowboys?
last week. I thought that was a tough matchup there with speed on speed with Adoree Jackson, but he's a good player. And if Josh Dobbs actually plays like a competent NFL quarterback, that's one thing. But it is a very tough defensive matchup. I don't think the Giants are in the class of the Cowboys here in containing things downfield and the pass rush and all the assets that the Cowboys have. So, yeah, I just can't feel good about Marquise Brown. Again, he's pretty much already Garrett Wilson, except he's not the same talent. He has to get a big play or a touchdown to really be worth the play here. Now, Gabe Davis, I do have just outside the borderline of a wide receiver 3 play. Again, these boomer bust guys are hard, but I was encouraged last week because Gabe Davis was not just being treated as a deep threat. They threw to him shorter. They got him more involved. I just think it's more of a Stephon Diggs pivot game here that they're going to really destroy the Commanders that way. So I'm a little concerned about Davis only because Diggs is kind of overdue to eat here big. So I think Gabe Davis is still playable as a wide receiver 3. I like that. But looking at Marquise Brown, I just can't feel comfortable. Another guy, Hopkins, man, I just don't like this Titans passing. Guess who's involved once again? Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. That guy will not go away. It doesn't matter who they've added. Treylon Burks, him, Chigakonkwo. They love throwing to Nick Westbrook-Ikhine in big situations. So it's really hard. And the Browns secondary is good. So it's lights up.
The Browns defense looks really good.
It's over.
So
and
this is
he also looks
a
slow.
scary
And
one.
that was my concern. He was getting older. He kind of looked slow, and they just threw a dart at him to see if he was going to be still viable, much like they did with Julio Jones, right? Didn't work out for the Titans. So maybe they're not good at adding veteran wide receivers here. So we will look at tight ends here in our next segment. We do have to look at where we have George Kittle ranked and where you think you should play him here this week. So we will get into that. But first, we have another word from one of our sponsors. All right, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by Bird Dogs. And I'm wearing a Bird Dogs white tech hat right now. They're always giving away some good stuff here for you. Now it's a water bottle that you'll get with your purchase. Bird Dogs, really, I can't say enough about their shorts. They're so comfortable. I'm wearing them right now. Just feel really good. They do the same exact thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They are not like regular shorts. They're made of stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fix this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. And this is great because if it's hot, you're going to be good to go all day. Bird Dogs uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. So really great. It's for anything you want to do. If you're playing golf or going on an evening out, you're just lounging around the house, it's all good for you there. So check it out. I mean, Bird Dogs is just fantastic here with all their products that you can get. And really, again, their hat is very comfortable that I'm wearing right now. And now you'll get a free gift of a water bottle that you can check here. So check it out there and go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or enter promo code LockedOnNFL. Check out for a free Bird Dogs water bottle this time with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. All right, Michelle, let us dive into our tight end rankings. Now, because we've talked about them a little bit, we'll start there and see where we have them this week, and then we can get into some other guys here. But George Kittle, I'm conservatively having him at number 8. I'm hoping for bigger things here this week. You have him at 5, but I think this is a George Kittle game tonight.
Yeah, so we kind of have our the two tight ends in this game switched up, right? So you have Darren Waller at 4, I have Darren Waller at 7, I have Kittle at 5, you have Kittle at 8. So you're trusting Waller more. I'm trusting Kittle to have this. I don't trust Kittle whatsoever, right? But if one of these are going to go off in this game, I do think it would be Kittle. Now, Darren Waller, so the 49ers have a really good defense against tight ends, right? They normally hold tight ends to not very many fantasy points, but Darren Waller did play the 49ers last year in week 17, had 16 fantasy points because he had 72 yards and a touchdown. So he was able to beat this defense just late last year. I think both of these guys are playable for sure. Both risky, but you know, there's not a lot of guys that have upside like these two do.
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating that in this middle tier, you include Dallas Goedert and Kyle Pitts in this group that you're watching.
Kyle Pitts does not go in this group. No, Kyle, we're going to talk about Kyle Pitts
maybe
later.
Some people drafted him there, right? Unfortunately, if you drafted him there, you're not going to.
That's their fault. You made a mistake.
If they were listening to the show, they would have a good alternative here. But you see Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson. You're like, why did I jump in on one of those guys like we told you to and just say, we're going to go there, we're going to go deep and go find a Sam LaPorta? So that's what you should have done. Avoided this tier in general. Waller, I still think it's going to be okay. One thing about Waller, he's a garbage time guy, right? They could get far behind. He'll be on the field. It's not like they'll take him off when they're trailing, right? So that's going to get him some cheap catches underneath here, probably in the second half of this game. So that's why I like him. That's why I bumped him up a little bit. But again, this landscape is so bad when you go in that direction this week. Now, Sam LaPorta, I said that he's a guy that you wish you drafted some of these guys. He's consistent so far in 2 games. He's been very involved. But this week, Michelle, I'm waiting for it. I think the touchdown finally comes this week. They allowed Hayden Hurst, the Falcons, to score in week 1. The Packers didn't get as much from Luke Musgrave, but Sam LaPorta, I think, has a good chance to score and have a nice game this week.
Yeah, tight end 4 on the season, one of 5 tight ends to have 100+ receiving yards through 2 weeks. No tight end who's run at least 30 routes is averaging more yards per route run than Sam LaPorta. He's having a freaking awesome beginning of his NFL season. And with Amon-Ra St. Brown dealing with the injury, we'll see if he plays or not, but there should be more targets to go around. And yeah, I do think LaPorta needs to start scoring some touchdowns, but they'll come. They'll come. So he's a great play. Another guy you just actually brought up that had a nice game in week 1, Hayden Hurst. I think he has a bounce back week. Week 2 completely disappeared, but it's because he was going up against the Saints. You don't play tight ends going up against the Saints. Now he gets the Seahawks, another nice matchup for fantasy tight ends. I have him ranked as my tight end 9, and it's not because I think it's going to be pretty. Anyone that ends at the tight end 9 doesn't really do anything, right? They maybe have 5 receptions for 45 yards, and that's going to be good enough to get you to tight end 9 in PPR leagues. You have him down at tight end 18. He led the Panthers in targets, receiving yards, and had that receiving touchdown in week 1. I think they're going to go back to that well, and Bryce Young needs someone other than just Adam Thielen, right? He was trying to utilize Adam Thielen week 2. I think he goes back to Hayden Hurst a bit more this week.
Yeah, I'm not excited about playing him. I think if you
nobody's excited about playing Hayden Hurst.
I am excited about playing Cade Otton, however, in a deeper league. The Eagles are the cheat code right now for playing tight ends. He got more involved last week. What I'm liking so far about the Buccaneers, they're basically only throwing to 4 guys: Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Cade Otton, and Rachaad White. That's it. There's nobody else really involved, and Baker Mayfield's thrown to all these guys, and that's what he's going to do, right? This is the best matchup here when you look at Darius Slay being out there, and then there are other issues, and that's why people are throwing on the Eagles inside. They don't have very good linebacker coverage right now with injuries as well as safety. So that's why Cade Otton, again, I think he's earned himself to be more involved. Let's remember he was a plus young athlete here. So he's a guy I do like above Hayden Hurst this week. I think he actually could have a little bit of upside going forward. We'll watch him. Now, Michelle, you're not going to like this probably. I have Kyle Pitts in the top 12. I'm just being hopeful here, and I know it's hard. I mean, you have him all the way down to 23.
What are we hopeful for?
I think he's going to get a touchdown this week. I think he gets a touchdown this week because he was targeted in the end zone. He should have come up with that ball last week. So again, if you get a touchdown, Michelle, welcome to the top 10 at tight end. That's all you need to do. There's your 6 points right there that shoot you up there. So I think Kyle Pitts
but like
scores.
there's so many tight ends that could just happen to get a touchdown,
Yeah.
right? So
But
Pitts
I
has
think
now
he'll
had
get more
3 or
involved.
fewer. So Pitts has had 3 or fewer receptions in 10 of his 12 games played since the start of last year. Never more than 5. So what are we holding out this hope for, right? He scored 7 or fewer PPR points in 9 of those 12 games. Are you just waiting and waiting and waiting for that one time he scores that touchdown? Maybe he can put up 15 points in PPR. Like, that's not winning you week either. Like, finally he helped you, do well, but he's destroying you week after week after week just for the hope that he gets a touchdown one week. I'm so over Kyle Pitts in fantasy.
I mean, the thing is, a lot of tight ends, first of all, are touchdown dependent, unfortunately. The other thing about this is actually the matchup is not bad here for him this week. I mean, I don't think the Lions have really seen a lot because they avoided Travis Kelce in week 1. And then in week 2, Seattle doesn't really use the tight end as much, but they did get some production there. If you look at their committee, they were involved quite a bit. So this is a weakness of the Lions defense right now. They invest a lot in corner. They've got a pretty good nickel package there to handle the slot, but this is a very tough spot for them to cover. So this is why I'm hoping for Kyle Pitts. I'm also hoping, just like Drake London, maybe this is a way to get him going, that we hated Drake London last week. He showed up and did something, of course, against Jair Alexander, of all people. So maybe Arthur Smith is listening. I hope he's listening to some people just complaining that you don't get your best player involved. So I'm taking a shot here. We'll see. Do I have him? Do I concern myself with playing him? No, I didn't draft him anywhere. But again, if you're hurting here, I think this is a week. This is going to happen. You're going to have him on benches all across, and you'll have a big game, of course, when this happens.
And I'm okay with that. Like, I'm okay missing his 1 15-point game. Like, I'm fine with it. Like, I'm done. I'm over it.
You didn't draft him, right?
Yeah, no, I don't have him in anything. Jake
So
Ferguson is a guy that you can consider picking up off waivers if you're desperate against the Cardinals. It's really just a desperation play. He's only had 11 receiving yards in each of the first 2 games. He did have 7 targets and 4 targets. He came down with a touchdown last week. This is touchdown or bust against the Cardinals. I'm higher on him at tight end 11. You have him all the way down at tight end 22. I'm fine with that. I really am. Like, if you want to play him or don't, I have no strong feelings. But one guy I want to talk about really quick before we close out the show, Taysom Hill, because, dealing with the Jamal Williams injury with the Saints. Now, Kendry Miller does look like he's going to play this week. So maybe he gets more work. Maybe Tony Jones, still gets his work. Taysom Hill had 9 carries last week. Came in and even threw a pass, but I do think they're going to utilize him as a runner more in just this 1 week until Alvin Kamara gets back.
Yeah. I mean, last week he was good in some capacity. I think I'm just a little worried about Taysom Hill in general. Like, please get out of here. We don't need you in this offense to cut away from our other actual Saints guys. Maybe it'll be a 1 week thing if Kendry Miller's not ready and Kamara's still suspended here and no Jamal Williams and they don't trust Tony Jones. But I guess
think
he has
there's a
some
better
position.
chance. I think there's a better chance Taysom Hill scores a touchdown than Kyle Pitts this week.
Okay, we'll track that. That'll be a good little side thing we'll watch this week.
That'll
But
be fun.
Taysom Hill, by the way, this is kind of a revenge game for Taysom Hill. He started kind of his NFL journey with the Packers, so something to keep in mind there. So it's going to be interesting to see if they involve him, and maybe it's a wrinkle that they'll pull out here because the Packers are pretty good against the pass here, and that can make Derek Carr's life miserable. So we'll see what happens here. But yeah, if you're hurting there, look, at this stage, if you don't have a top tight end and you have a good reasoning and logic behind playing someone, then go for it, because all these people are dead to us. I think you look at Juwan Johnson, same team, tight end that's disappeared. Foster Moreau's involved. Chig Okonkwo, totally gone. Greg Dulcich is hurt. Cole Kmet, is he that exciting? No. Pat Freiermuth has not done a lot, even though he has a touchdown. Evan Ingram, what has he done? Not too much. I mean, he had a better game last week. So there's nobody reliable really here beyond those big 3. Maybe Hunter Henry and Sam LaPorta are getting in that conversation. But again, this is why you should have tight end depth and maybe play the matchups and go the streaming platoon route if you don't have one of those big tight ends.
Yeah, Absolutely. And I do think Cole Kmet, you brought him up. I think he's a solid play this week. I think they're going to have to pass,
Yeah,
or
it's a good matchup.
I don't know what the Bears are going to do, but we'll get into some of our favorite plays tomorrow when it comes to DFS and our favorite prize picks of the weeks. And I'm excited to have that conversation with you tomorrow.
Yeah, we did okay last week. I think, unfortunately, we had some stuff not go our way on Monday night, but we'll talk about that and we'll get it right for you this week here. And the way that we want you to play PrizePicks. It's a lot of fun. We talked about earlier, and we will have the PrizePicks picks of the week to close the week. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We will look at DFS. We'll look at the prices on FanDuel. We'll look at our PrizePicks, all that good stuff here to close the show. And if you have any injury updates, we'll provide that to you as well. So for Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.